I'm Rick Zamperin, and this is the CHCH Newsmakers podcast. Buying or selling your home can be a stressful experience. From location to price point, packing, and right sizing, there's a lot to consider. Joining me on Newsmakers today is longtime Hamilton Realtor Michael St from Michael St. Realty. And we're going to talk about a bunch of things, including what is it like selling a home or buying a home or upsizing, right-sizing, all the terminology that in the world that you live in, to how you started in your career, how your career has blossomed in the local market. But I want to begin with this. This week, there was some news from the Bank of Canada where interest rates are being held at 2.25%. We've had some fluctuations over the past couple of years because of inflation, but for the time being, it's steady as she goes. What's the impact of a decision like that? Does that directly affect the real estate or the housing market?
I mean, there's always a direct effect to some degree. Obviously, when interest rates go up or down, there's going to be an impact on monthly payments, interest rates, and the whole financial end of buying or selling a home. But I think almost as importantly is the psychological impact. Right. When people hear interest rates are going up, it can definitely depress activity, makes people feel a little uneasy or worried. When rates go down, of course, feeling like maybe there's a little bit more of an opportunity to get into the market, interest rates dropping, demand likely to increase, maybe prices increasing. So there's a huge psychological impact. And of course, at the end of the day, there is always the dollars and cents.
But it's not like you get called the next day, like, all right, Michael, it's time to sell the house, right? Like interest rates are staying put or they're dropping. It's not that instant, right?
No, not at all. I mean, when you're in a scenario where interest rates are dropping very quickly, like we saw during the pandemic, or interest rates rising very quickly post-pandemic when inflation started getting out of control, you will see a little bit more of an immediate impact. But I don't think the average home buyer or seller is sitting there every day watching the Bank of Canada's website and seeing a quarter point increase or decrease and thinking, well, this is it.
Yeah. Let's talk a bit about that pre-pandemic and kind of the post-pandemic activity, because it was like a roller coaster for 2, 3, 4 years. How has it stabilized? And would you use that kind of word to describe the current market?
I mean, I look at it as we're on a bit of a roller coaster even before the pandemic. I mean, really since the 2008 recession, once we got through that, which was a pretty quick recovery in Canada. I mean, in the United States, they saw a very different situation. I remember being in Florida in 2009 and going through communities where there was literally a for sale sign on almost every other property.
Wow.
So we fared very well in Canada at the time. We saw a very, very temporary blip. And of course, from there, with interest rates being what had been historically low at the time, we saw a lot of activity. So we've seen growth in the market now really since from that time all the way up in through the pandemic. Obviously, a couple little bumps along the way, but overall the trajectory was upward. With the pandemic and interest rates going to what we would consider emergency levels, I'm not sure we've ever seen those before.
Yeah.
That just threw gasoline on the fire that was already lit. And that was where we saw parabolic growth in house prices, inventory shrinking to levels we'd never seen, and what we experienced.
Yeah, days on market were really,
we were a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
I remember seeing 30 days and telling everyone at the office, guys, you're never going to see this again in your life.
Yeah.
And then, within a short period of time, we were looking at half a month. And,
wild.
and nothing that you would expect to ever be sustainable. But when your borrowing costs are as low as they were at the time, you're going to incite that kind of activity.
Do you think we'll ever see something like that again? Or would we need a global changing event to occur for that to happen again?
I would think so.
Yeah.
I don't think I don't think anyone should ever expect to see interest rates that low again unless we were facing something pretty serious, a pandemic, a world war, something pretty catastrophic. And I think even with the Bank of Canada today, you can see that they're hesitating to want to even bring rates any lower. For them, they want to have room. Lowering interest rates is supposed to, create a little extra demand, ease up on borrowing costs. And if we got into an emergency and rates were too low, how do you go any lower?
Yeah.
So they brought them up to bring inflation back into check. They've brought them down now that inflation has gotten under control for the most part. And I think they want to kind of just keep them where they are. And remember, historically, if you look at the chart, and I always go over the whole 100-year chart in the office. I mean, if you're looking at the chart, interest rates right now are historically low, minus the pandemic.
Yeah, I remember seeing the chart and, going back to the 50s and 60s and seeing those, $10,000 homes. It's like, wow. I remember those. I don't remember those days, but I remember, seeing those numbers and thinking like my parents or grandparents, having enough money to buy a home of that size. Certainly, we're not going to those prices ever again, obviously. But where do you see this market going this year?
Yeah, I mean, and that's a great point. I mean, my grandfather bought his first home for about $12,000, and that was a lot of money. Parents probably around $70,000,
right.
And later on in life, $200,000, and they thought, how, this is crazy. Who's ever going to afford this? And at one point, $375,000 was probably the equivalent today of a $2 million home,
right.
But over time, real estate values always go up. There's always, of course, bumps in the road, but you're never going to go backwards, at least to that degree. We've seen the pandemic increase because of interest rates being low, people at home, et cetera, et cetera. We've come off of the COVID peak. If you were to look at a chart, we've sort of chopped off the whole increase from and during the COVID pandemic. So for a home buyer right now evaluating the market that might have been a little worried about paying top dollar, that entire gain that we saw during the pandemic has been eliminated. In some cases, we've actually gone back even further, and we're now into the 2017, 18, 19 range, all depending on the location, the type of product. The market is not as simple as people like to make it out to be. The location you're in, the type of product, the price bracket, each of those segments can look very differently. So some product faring better than others. I mean, if you're in a newer condo, especially, and the closer you get to the GTA, you're probably some of the hardest hit real estate in Canada. If you're in a detached home, probably looking at a little bit of a different scenario. But I was looking at some numbers yesterday, and the Hamilton region and surrounding are one of the worst hit areas in all of Canada.
In terms of
price point.
Yeah, wow. And that's been like that for a while, right?
It's been since February 2022, when the Bank of Canada announced their first interest rate increase. Within probably 10 days, I could see and feel the entire shift. The trajectory of the market was moving in a completely different direction. And then from there, things start to whittle down. You have a few bumps along the way where maybe, I would call them false starts. You feel like things are picking up a little bit. Okay, hey, sales are moving, and then down a bit further, and up a little bit, down a little further. So it's been a little bit of a rocky road market-wise for the last 3.5 years, but we're seeing shifts, and I think since January, really, we've seen new listings starting to come in lower numbers, because everything's about supply and demand.
Right.
Despite what, sometimes you hear out there, it's all supply and demand. So new listings coming in much lighter than we'd seen in previous years. And with that, less new listings coming online. Your inventory's going to start to shrink. Sales are starting to pick up a bit. And with that, you're tightening. So we're, it's 4 or 5 months now of tightening. Toronto seeing tightening. Canadian Real Estate Association yesterday just released their latest stats. Another month of a tightening market. Vancouver, the Hamilton area in the last, few weeks. So I think we could be at the turning point.
Do you have a theory on why the market has tightened in the last few months?
I think at the end of the day, there's only so much inventory you can put on the market. It's a bit of an interesting situation. When interest rates start going up, people tend to panic a little bit.
Right.
And it's very emotional markets. Real estate is very emotional. People see interest rates going up, they panic, they think, hey, maybe I should get out of the market, maybe I need to sell, and you get this flood of inventory. Inventory that maybe would not have been there if those rates hadn't gone up, but you get this panic sell, people throw their homes on the market, now all of a sudden there's a lot more inventory, buyers get a little nervous and pull back at the same time, so now you have less buyers, you have twice the inventory, and of course that's where you start seeing an impact on sales numbers, prices, and of course the media cycle feeds all of that, because when the reports start coming out saying, hey, inventory's doubled, homes are taking longer to sell, prices are softening, sales are coming down, I mean, what are your everyday home buyers, investors thinking? They're thinking, this is, I'm gonna wait. And so it's everyone pulls back. Sellers throw their homes on the market, still trying to obtain the dollars of yesteryear. Buyers are pulling back, thinking, I'm going to wait because it's a scary time and maybe I'm going to get a deal. And you sort of get this stalemate. And it takes time. And, sellers are very stubborn. They'll give it a shot. If they can't get the money that they thought that they could have, were going to obtain, they'll pull it off the market. Maybe in the spring, come back in the fall, try again. If it doesn't work in the fall, they come back in the spring again. and so there's this tug of war scenario, and slowly but surely, and over the last 3 years, people have been starting to come together. The buyers and the sellers have been having to adjust their expectations. Buyers at the same time having to adjust their expectations. Yes, you're going to get a discount today from the COVID peak, but you're also not going to get your home for the same price that your parents did or my grandparents, right? So there's a little bit of that going on, and I think you get to a point where, reality really strikes and everyone starts to come together and the confidence resumes in the market, and the cycle starts going the other way again.
The push and pull of the supply and demand dichotomy is really fascinating, especially in real estate. And there was a time, and from my recollection, maybe more so before the pandemic ever started, and you mentioned the word investor, or some would say house flipper, right? They'll buy a home, they'll fix it up, and then they'll sell it at a different, higher price point. Are we still seeing that? Is that return on investment still there?
Not from an investment. I mean, investors have been, I would say for the most part, totally out of the market now for 3.5 years. Prior to interest rates going up, there was a large percentage of buyers were investors. And as the market increases, I mean, since really the great financial crisis, when rates went down, that was really when it started. But it starts very slowly, right? People see low borrowing costs, they start doing the math, they think, hey, with rates this low and money this available, probably a good time to buy assets. Real estate being one of the best assets you can buy. Clearly, investors jump in. And as investors jump in, your everyday buyers jump in, prices rise, sales increase, the media promoting the positivity in the market, it attracts more investors, right? If you went out and bought a condo tomorrow and made $75,000 just for signing a piece of paper in 24 months, your friends, your family might hear about that and think, well, maybe that's a great idea. And all of a sudden they jump in. Maybe you think, well, I should buy another. And it just creates this cycle that it feeds it feeds the market, and the very thing that you're getting into the market to try to accomplish, you're actually now lending to the end result. And it just goes and goes and goes until at some point, obviously, you hit a bit of a wall. And the same on the other side as you're coming down.
There's been a lot of conversation, and rightfully so, of building more homes, the whole supply and demand. We need more homes for people to live in them, obviously. Bring prices down is one of the tactics or goals of that strategy. We're clearly not building enough homes, obviously, but governments have tried different things in terms of removing development charges, taking taxes off of homes in terms of those that are under $1 million. Have those moved the needle? Have they helped any?
I think the problem is that it's all about timing. Okay. And so when the market was moving, that was really when we needed the supply. We needed the supply 10 years ago, 15 years ago. I mean, the writing was on the wall back in 2012, 13. Anyone that looked at the numbers could see that we were we were running through product faster than it was being developed. And of course, when you add the, immigration, temporary residents into the mix, I mean, you're talking about millions of additional people. There's 2, 3, 4 times more people in need of a home than there are homes being created. Yeah. So that's a problem that, is a decade or more in the making. I mean, we haven't been building enough houses for a long time. Obviously, low rates are going to encourage people to buy real estate. Immigration, I mean, bringing in or temporary residents, everyone needs somewhere to live. You've got your everyday Canadian citizens that have already been here that need a home, having babies, children, families, life's changing, right? And so there's been an issue there. There's multiple levels to the issue, but most of it really comes down to the municipalities. The federal government has very little control over housing supply, truthfully. I mean, they like to, of course, lead people to believe that there's something they're going to really be able to do to move the needle. Unfortunately, it's not possible. Provincial government has a role in that for sure, and I think they've taken a bit more of a stance on that in the last few years to kind of drop the hammer a little bit and to do some of the dirty work the municipalities are afraid to do. When you're talking about, democracy is a beautiful thing, freedom, giving everyone a voice. But I think when you're talking about local neighborhood politics, which is what housing is really all about. If in your neighborhood tomorrow a developer came in and proposed some new development, all of a sudden things kind of change. Everyone agrees we need more housing until a developer's in your neighborhood trying to turn, the former school that your kids went into a condo development. Right. And now suddenly nobody wants it in their backyard. Right. And I think local municipalities, councilors, mayors, they're very prone to being impacted by the feelings of their constituents. And I understand that you're there to be there for your constituents, sure. but a leader needs to be able to also step back and say, hey guys, I understand that this is maybe a bit of a change for the neighborhood, but looking at the greater good, at the end of the day, a house is shelter. Right? And everyone needs a roof over their head. It's not always about how it looks or how it feels or what you think it may or may not do to your neighborhood. We need shelter, and it's not about how pretty it is. Sometimes we get a little caught up in the look and the feel and the architecture. But I mean, at its core, a home is shelter. And I think on the local level, there's been a huge struggle with pushing back against the opposition that I think it's universal. I mean, I've yet to see a development anywhere in my career where a neighborhood was going, yes, let's do this. Right. It's universally opposed. Yeah. So there's a lot of pushback on the local level.
Yeah, and you're referring to NIMBYism, not in my backyard, right? Where a lot of people, and it could be easily here's a bungalow, and now it's turned into a triplex or a duplex or whatever the case is, and people are like, oh, we're going to have more people on our street, more traffic, like this is a no-go. Yeah. How has that impacted real estate? Has it made it more difficult?
I mean, it's why we're seeing the price growth that we're seeing. I mean, even with the bit of the cream being taken off the top there from the COVID real estate market, values are still very high. Right. I mean, there's no question about it. And I don't think we've seen the end of that. I mean, you can take the energy out of the market for a period of time, but ultimately supply and demand is going to catch up to itself. When buyers jump, and we're increasingly seeing buyers coming off the sidelines. Now you're seeing we've had a temporary reprieve in immigration and temporary residents, but I don't think we've seen the last of that. I mean, Canada is a nation of welcoming people. So I think those numbers will return to more normal levels. And even if they don't go to the levels we saw during the pandemic, those are levels that are still unsustainable from a housing perspective. And so I think we're going to get back to a point in the very near future where we're in the same situation, looking at a market where there's 2 or 3 buyers for every house available. And when the market changes, the incentive is no longer there for developers to bring product to the market. So you could be a community or a municipality today saying, hey guys, come on in and build, we'll remove development charges, we'll lower the taxes, and all those things sound great in theory, but if no developer can make a case financially for developing a project, those incentives are worthless.
Yeah.
So those are things that might have helped a little bit in the past, but truthfully, the real needle moving activity is we've got to get over the local opposition. And I'm not saying that you have to approve every project everywhere, and it's, and in its, in whatever form the developer is proposing. But we're looking at a world where everything is just being shut down entirely. Doesn't matter what it is, next to maybe a single family home.
Right.
And that's a tough thing. So the incentives, it's easy to propose them when they're not really going to cost much. I mean, you can reduce development charges, but you're not getting them anyways. Developers aren't developing.
That's right.
So the market needs to be in a position where a developer can look at a piece of land, make the financial case to an investor, to banks, do the pro formas, go through the construction costs, which are through the roof. They've never been higher. Those costs have not gone down. Just because home values might have gone down, or maybe the economy's not as strong as it was, the cost of construction, labor, land, the planning process, it's never been more expensive. And I've had a lot of experience with developers over the years, and I've seen these numbers. Most of these projects are hanging on by a thread.
Right.
And when you have values that are now back to pre-COVID levels, but you have costs that are 2026 levels, the numbers just don't make sense. And so there's essentially no new construction taking place right now in the province of Ontario.
Yeah, if those developers aren't seeing the return on investment, they're not going to proceed with that development.
And, it's not just about them. I mean, it's also where are they getting the funds to move forward? You have to sit in front of a bank and present a case. And they're, the bank is not going to lend you $100 million on a project that looks like it's not viable.
Right.
So they've got to present the case. They have to go in and say, hey, here's all my costs, here's what the market's going to bear, and then there has to be enough profit in there for a bank to even be willing to lend you the construction financing.
Yeah.
It's a very, very stringent and difficult process to get through.
What does the average buyer and seller look like today? Are we seeing first-time home buyers now finally getting into the market? Are there a lot of lateral moves? Are people still downsizing or right-sizing? What is going on?
Right now, I would say first-time home buyers, and I believe some of the latest stats I looked at would back that up, are the number one buyer in the market right now.
Okay.
So first-time home buyers are looking at this as maybe a window of opportunity to get into the market. And and in our world, we're always looking at the big picture. We're not we're not in the business of looking at this like a stock market. This isn't buying Tesla stock today at a low price and hoping to flip it for more, or vice versa. This is a long-term game, real estate. Now, you may get lucky in the short term, but realistically, you want to look at it over the long term. We talked about, my grandparents, my parents. I remember what I bought my first home for today. I certainly couldn't buy that for the same price anymore.
Yeah.
Even with, some of the prices coming down in the last few years, it's nowhere close. It's a long-term game, and the sooner that you get into the market, the better. I mean, I always say, the best time to, plant the seed was yesterday, but the next best time is today. I've never met anyone that waited and looked back years down the road and thought that was a good decision. But first-time buyers now starting to look at this as an opportunity, realizing, hey, I'm getting things for a post, pre-COVID price. And, long-term trajectory is always moving forward at some point. We can't always time when that's going to be I can't tell you the exact moment or the exact year. The statistics are starting to show us that maybe there's a bit of a shift underway, but long-term it doesn't matter anyways, because unless you're looking to sell your home 6 or 12 months down the road, which of course most Canadian home buyers are not looking to do, you're going to be in good shape. So first-time buyers, investors, very few of them out there in the market, baby boomers, you're getting some of that happening, obviously, as people are getting older. They're still in the family home. There's 3 times more space in there than you need. Empty bedrooms from the kids that have been long gone. I think when prices were going up, obviously baby boomers were thinking, well, I'll just hang in because the money I'm making it's pretty incredible, and why not hang in a little longer? Now that values have come down, they're sitting and going, well, now I'm going to wait because values have come down. So there are many that are in a position where they don't have to go anywhere, and there's not a lot of options as well. If you're a baby boomer looking to size down, I mean, traditionally you would expect them to maybe want to get into something smaller, a townhouse product, condo, retirement living, but that's pretty limited. So, going back to the development discussion, so a lot of them are opting to just ride out their years in the family home. Some clearly getting to a point where that's maybe not feasible and having to cash out, but many really in a position where they're hanging on. So we're not seeing the flood of inventory that you would expect from that large chunk of the population that are in homes really that aren't, you would argue aren't really suitable or adequate or needed at this stage in their life.
Yeah, there was a point during the early time of the pandemic where we had bidding wars, multiple, and I'm talking 10, 15, 20 plus people bidding on a home. Are we still seeing bidding wars? Maybe not to that degree, but does this still happen?
For sure. I mean, we've got at least one happening every week in our office. I think that's something that's always been there during the pandemic, and obviously the run up to the pandemic, even in the late 20-teens there, your 2014 to 2019, we were seeing an increasing number of bidding wars as the supply, the inventory decreased, and of course the number of buyers increasing. You're going to start facing that scenario where, like we were saying earlier, more buyers out there than there are homes available. Naturally, you're going to start seeing the bidding wars. They've come down dramatically from the peak of COVID. I mean, there was a point where every single home we listed was a bidding war, and 20, 30, or 40 offers was just another day. I mean, we spent every night at our office till midnight, for three years, basically, with a stack of offers this thick on our boardroom table, trying to go through them and decipher them all before our clients came in, so we could lay them all out on the table and figure out what we were going to do.
What was that like? Like, mentally, you're thinking, oh my gosh, this is nuts.
It's crazy.
Every day.
A lot of pressure. I mean, you've got 40 agreements of purchase and sale on your boardroom table, and you're trying to review them all. You're looking at the conditions, the closing dates, the price points. You're a lot of pre-work that goes on to that. So you're getting on the phone with 40 agents, calling them, hey, is this your best offer? Is there any more you can do? And then you're trying to whittle them down to the final maybe 1, 2, or 3, and seeing what they're willing to do. Because, remember, in that scenario, we are working in the best interest of our seller.
Sure.
Obviously, when we're on the buyer side, we're in there trying to fight for our buyers to get them the best opportunity. Now, when the cards are stacked that much against you in a moment like during the pandemic, the goal really is about winning. It's not how much can I get off of the price or, how flexible can we get these terms. It's more a matter of how do we win.
Right. For your client.
Right, for the client. And on the other side, when you're representing a seller, it's the same, right? How can I get my client the most for their home? This is their biggest investment of their life. This is everything. This could be their retirement. So they're sitting there and they're, looking at you through a microscope, and it's all about working the opportunities you have and trying to get them in the best position that you possibly can. Emotions are running really high. Even when things were as crazy as they were, you had clients looking at you like, hey, I think you can get me more, or I'm not accepting the $200,000 over list price.
Right.
I want $250,000, right? And you had buyers freaking out. You had other agents freaking out when they didn't win. Of course, everyone's upset. They want to know why it wasn't them, or why didn't you give me another opportunity? I mean, there's so many moving parts to this. It's a very emotional experience for the buyers and sellers. And, I was talking to someone earlier today in the office about that. And, for us, we have to remove the emotion. It's about dollars, cents.
It's a business deal.
It's business. And so we're there to bridge the gap because, our clients, as wonderful as they are, they're not always realistic. Their expectations are not always in alignment with the current reality of a market. And so you've got to be the doctor that sits there and says, hey, I understand, but I need you to lower your cholesterol. You're going to have to take this pill. You're going to have to start working out, or, and it's about bringing people together ultimately, because if people could do that on their own, there probably wouldn't be a need for me.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, our job is to be there to just pull all the emotion out, to see both sides of the equation, because at the end of the day, everyone needs to feel like they've won to some degree. It's very rare you see a scenario where one side is, that much further ahead than the other. Is this in the best interests of the seller? Is the buyer also winning here? And can we try to just bridge the gap enough to make this come together? Otherwise, if you leave everyone to their own devices,
it's going to be chaos.
There'll just be there won't be any sales.
Yeah. You're part mediator, part psychiatrist.
Yes.
You're bringing two sides
Financial
together.
advisor.
Yeah,
There's
absolutely.
a huge legal element to this. There's an emotional element to it. There's the real estate component and just knowing about the product and all of the different elements of that. So we wear a lot of different hats. And, people are amazing, but when you get into these scenarios where all your money's on the line and there's lots of emotion, and sometimes, remember, people are moving for great reasons. Sometimes people are moving because there's been some difficulty, and that could be a variety of different things.
Right.
It's not anything personal against us, but the emotions can be running pretty high, and we've got to try not to allow that to impact us, and we've got to do what we believe is in the best interest of our client, and in some cases, even if they don't realize it at the time.
Right. When did you get into the industry, and why did you want to become Michael St. the realtor?
Yeah, that's great. Great question. I don't know the exact date, but I got in before the Great Recession, probably around 2006, 2007. So I had seen a little bit of the last peak there before the recession, and of course things taking a little bit of a turn, at least for a couple of seasons before they took off. So I've been in it, I guess 20-ish years. Real estate was the only thing I ever thought of doing. A lot of people that I know, most people, normal people, consider a career. I mean, what do I want to do with my life? They're in high school. I've got all these options. Maybe I want to be a firefighter. I never thought of doing anything other than being in real estate my entire life, even going back to being 3 years old. I mean, I would put a little suit on as a kid, and I wanted to be in real estate. I mean, the influence came from my family.
Okay.
My dad got into real estate in 1979, my mom in the mid to late 80s. And so the only thing I ever saw was real estate. And being in such a hectic business, my dad would often be going out to appointments, looking at homes, and he'd throw me in the car and bring me along for the ride. Sometimes I'd even have my little suit on. But
so you got a first-hand experience.
Yeah. So that was all I knew. It was all I saw. I saw my parents working extremely hard, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I mean, after dinner, my mom would go down to the little home office we had and lock herself in the room and make phone calls. And, my dad would be in and out of the house and driving out at 11 o'clock at night to go and present an offer. And of course, back then, he probably had one of the first cell phones of any human I knew. He had the block, the Miami Vice.
The brick, yeah.
The Miami Vice brick. And he had the first, that you plugged into the cigarette lighter into the car.
Yeah.
But I mean, communication was pretty limited. The pager was going off while we were at Disneyland, and he'd be running to the payphone to throw his quarters in to make his calls. He'd bring the fax machine on holidays. And so all I saw and knew was real estate. Yeah. And from a very young age, for whatever reason, and I can't explain it, it was the only thing I ever wanted to do. And I would, on the weekends, take their for sale signs, their open house signs. And I would go outside when they weren't maybe always paying attention, and I'd put them out in front of our house.
Okay.
And there were times where people would just walk into our home. So I remember my mom telling...
Were you ready for them too?
I was. Yeah. My parents weren't. My mom would be in the kitchen, and all of a sudden someone would walk into the house, and she'd look out and realize that I had grabbed the open house signs and put them out in front of the house. So someone must have been passing by and came in. So that was always what I wanted to do, and I've never thought of doing anything else.
Do you remember your first home that you sold?
That's a great question. Wow.
And how long did it take to do that? Like, you get into the industry, was it like a couple months, couple weeks?
My first home sold would have been in Mount Hope.
Okay.
When I started out, I was working in and around a new development site up off of Upper James and Whitechurch Road. So I believe it's hard to recall. I've sold a lot of homes now. And even in my earlier days, but that we would have been in a particular neighborhood off of Upper James and Whitechurch Road.
Okay. What was the feeling like? Like you've sold?
Fear.
Really, eh?
Yeah, I was scared to death.
Right.
I mean, it doesn't, people look at you and think that maybe you're a confident, all knowledgeable real estate person today, or, whatever the case. But truthfully, I was scared. Yeah. As much as I knew what I wanted to do, I didn't necessarily realize what I was doing until I got involved in many ways. I mean, the business from the outside, looking out from the outside in, is very different than being on the ground and now being a real estate agent. There's a lot to know and to understand. It takes years, lots of experience, and I think I was always a bit of an introvert, believe it or not. Kind of kept to myself, kind of the guy in the corner and doing my own thing. And I think learning how to communicate with people was a big deal. The product knowledge, the financial components, the legal components, there's a lot of moving parts. So I would say my first couple of years were a huge adjustment period for me in many ways, and lots of fear. But I think at the end of the day, it's all about your goals. I mean, what do you want to accomplish? What do you want to achieve in life? And what are your options? And I had picked my path and I'd burned all my boats. And in one way, that's a bit scary. Sure, in another, it's probably the greatest thing you can ever do. And the question just became, well, if this doesn't work out for me, what will? And I didn't have a lot of other options. The will was there. And if there's a will, there's a way. And I just dedicated myself 24 hours a day to learning and trying to be the best at what I do.
Mm-hmm. How did you overcome the fear, and when did that happen? Like you mentioned, it took about a year or two to kind of get, from treading to swimming. Taking
action.
Okay.
I mean, most of the things that are probably going to benefit you the most in life are the things that are the scariest. And I don't know if the fear ever goes away. I mean, I was nervous on the ride over here.
Right.
Fear is fear. You don't want fear to overtake and to prevent you from taking the action. But I think a little bit of fear is always good. You never want to feel like you know it all, or you have all the answers, or that you never want ego to impact you. You always want to be learning, always want to be growing, always want to be in a position of a beginner, even if you're not, and realizing that, hey, just as quick as I've gone in this direction, I can go in the reverse. And of course, in our world today, everything's changing.
Yeah.
Nothing is the same from 20 years ago. I would say in our world, at least in our office, nothing's the same from 36 months ago. We're completely moving in different direction, evolving, changing, innovating, growing, and you can't afford to stand still. So I think taking the action is the key. You don't have to have all the answers. You may need to know where to find them. But you don't have to have all the answers. You've got to do the tough things that scare you, that make you nervous, that give you the feeling in the gut. And I think everything always seems like a bigger deal until you're in the midst of it and you realize, hey, you know what? I can handle that. I did a great job. You learn and you get back up and you keep moving. I mean, I don't know anyone in any field anywhere. When you look at sports, how many baskets did Michael Jordan miss in the beginning of his career, right? But the key was that he kept shooting the hoops.
Right.
He kept getting out there every morning. He kept shooting. He kept practicing. He was totally focused on his one thing. And I think, not that he probably wasn't nervous when he was going out there for those NBA championships. I'm sure he was. But at the end of the day, you gotta keep it moving.
Yeah, fear is a great motivating factor. That is for sure. In the early or maybe mid 1990s, the internet came around in full force, and that certainly changed how real estate was delivered in certain respects with virtual tours and such. Now AI is the next big thing, but is it in a real estate capacity? How is it being used, and how maybe can it change the landscape of the market?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the internet was interesting because the internet, when just before I got into the business, I remember, I was on the internet from the AOL days, right from the very beginning, AOL chat and surfing the
sound
web
going and the whole bit,
the whole 9 yards. I was always very into technology as a kid, but I remember seeing my parents getting a website at one point, probably just a handful of years before I got into the business. And at the time, it was almost a vanity element to the marketing. You would go and meet a family and they'd be looking at you thinking, well, what's that going to do for me? Right? A website, who goes on the internet? Even if you do, who's buying anything on the internet? Remember, we came from a time where people thought that purchasing something online was never going to happen. Putting your contact or your financial information, your Visa card into a website was as crazy as thinking, that there's aliens on another planet, right? And now today, obviously, we're buying most of the things that we have probably from the internet in one form or another. So a website was like a QR code 20 years ago. And it was something you mentioned. You might have had one. They were probably one of very few people out of hundreds or thousands that even had a website. It was all about the newspaper. How big was your ad? How many weeks is it in the newspaper? And that whole thing evolved, of course, until we got to the point where the internet was the hub. And some of those things from the past essentially, either disappeared or became less important.
Yeah, like the phone book, right?
Totally. Yeah. I remember taking the phone book when I first got into the business and bringing it over to a photocopier and, taking a photocopy because I needed to call everybody on, East 15th Street because we just sold a house. Now, no such thing as the yellow pages or the phone book anymore. But we've seen a lot of changes from that time. And I think about it I'm very interested in marketing, just partly because I'm interested, partly because it's a very important part of what we do as a real estate agents in a real estate business. But the change that you would, if we went to my dad in 1979 and right up to not long before I got, or maybe even to the time I got into the business, and you had asked him what had changed, what's changed? I don't know that there would have been much. You had newspapers, you had phone books, there was no internet. And
radio, TV, that was your marketing, right?
And nobody in our business, right? And the mail became something later on in the 90s, at least from a real estate perspective, that became a little more important. We started seeing postcards, but realtors weren't really on television or on radio or anything like that in a big way. It was mostly the newspaper, classified ads. There were, today's modern Kijiji, or Facebook Marketplace. We used to be in the little black and white classified ads, but not much change from the time that he got into the business until really like the 2000s, the early 2000s. The internet came in, and then we saw a shift. And then so many different things splintered off of that. Because, when you're talking about the internet, you could be talking about social media is one type of marketing. And within that, there's 5 or 6 or 7 different entire avenues of marketing, right? YouTube, you're talking about search. It could be organic. It could be paid. It could be display. It could be, there's so many elements, email marketing, right? These are all things that have splintered off of the internet that are sort of animals to their own. And so there's been a lot of change over there. And now, of course, traditional elements still being there, for us, we're covering every facet of marketing, from the most traditional that you would say to the most innovative things that are happening in the business. AI now coming into focus. How's that going to play a role in all of this? I think it's going to become another piece in the pie. There's a whole full circle of things that we do, at least from a marketing perspective, covering virtually every base. There are a few things that we no longer do that just really are totally out of the picture from a marketing perspective, but anything that is effective is we're doing. And I think AI is now going to become one piece of that pie. along with many others. Now, being a person that's always trying to be on to the next thing, sometimes I get too caught up in the next thing and forget that the thing from yesterday is still a factor, right? I mean, look at radio. We're on 12 radio stations. I personally don't always listen to the radio, right? I mean, you look at television, super important what you guys do here. There's a huge quadrant of the population that might tune in. There may be a quadrant that doesn't, or maybe does periodically.
Sure.
And that's for anything, right? The mail, I hardly check my mail, yet we put out hundreds of thousands of newsletters in the mail every month. So everyone's got a different thing.
Yeah.
You know, someone else might be glued to YouTube and getting hit by our commercials. So it's not that it's one way or the other. We see all of those things as being valuable, and just really they're focusing on a different demographic, a different person.
Right.
The way you consume information might be different than the way I do. And so you've got to cover all bases. And I think AI is now joining the club. And I think it's definitely going to be the most impactful thing we've seen since the internet. The question will be on what level. I mean, today, is it impacting real estate in a major way on the ground? I would say no.
Right.
I mean, it's not something what it's impacting is it's giving the consumers the ability to process knowledge a little differently, the same way that the internet did when suddenly you could go on to realtor.ca or onto our website and see a listing and get information. And it didn't require you to call me to walk over with my sheet and give you a piece of paper or a brochure. You can look that up from the comfort of your own home on your iPad. So it gave you access to information, which can be a good thing and a bad thing, because you have to know how to decipher the information ultimately for it to matter. I mean, we have more information today than we do at any time in the history of the world, but that doesn't necessarily make you an expert in everything that you're doing in the world, right? I mean, you might be able to look up medical information. I don't know that you're a doctor. You might be able to see real estate information. I'm not sure you know how to decipher that or read between the lines, or how to utilize that to your advantage, right? So it's good to be informed, but there still comes a point where you need someone that specializes in whatever it is that you're focusing on to really be able to kind of guide you through. If anything, I would say it's almost made people a little more confused. Because now there's so much information that you're looking at all of this and you don't even know what to do with it. So there's pros and cons to it. AI, I think, you can throw some questions into there and ask it certain things, and it can bring some value to the table. So there's an element of that, and I think we're going to see that evolving, like from the consumer perspective. Obviously, when you AI, hey, who's the best real estate agent in my neighborhood, there's a component there, and that's starting to become a more important thing. And clearly that's something we're focusing on because we want ChatGPT to mention us. But there's the information component. Hey, I just met with Michael St, and here's what he told me. What do you think? Right? And there's going to be pros and cons to that, because ChatGPT may not always know the right answer. And so you've got to be on your toes and know how to disseminate the good and the bad, and keep that in check. And then there's, on the real estate agent side of it, how is AI benefiting us as a business? And I think I'm on AI 24 hours a day with anything and everything I'm doing. I mean, it's made me infinitely more productive in so many ways. It's actually a bit scary. The things that I've been able to do in the last 6 months would have took me a year or two and a 20-person marketing team in some cases, and an enormous amount of money. Today, I can do and go through a lot of those exercises, just me and my computer, and get the same or an even better result. I think AI will impact customer service. I wouldn't be shocked if in the next handful of years you're you're inquiring on a property, it may not be a real person. It may be an AI that's calling you back instantly, 24 hours a day, answering all your questions, chatting with you about your wants and needs, and maybe setting up that appointment for me to, or one of our agents to come out and meet you, versus it being a live person. I could see automate, from a database perspective, there's automation already underway in our database. And, people moving around, things taking place now, all happening automatically, where maybe just 90 days ago, there would have been a person sitting there like an air traffic controller managing all of these inquiries and clients and things that are happening. So I think there's a lot of change coming on that front, on both sides of the spectrum, the consumer and the agent. And obviously the people that take advantage of that, I think, are going to just see parabolic increases in productivity, just like, in the past, right? There was realtors out there back in the day that I, used to and still look up to, that are, not necessarily all in the business anymore, that were the, leaders of the industry during the newspaper days. And as the newspaper started to go the way of the dinosaur, at least in a physical form, they went with it. And you've seen that happening many times since, with the change of technology, and it's underway right now again in our business as we innovate, and others maybe kind of are stuck in their ways, or are, even sometimes you double down on the things that aren't working anymore when they stop working. Hey, that ad that was working yesterday, it doesn't seem to be as impactful, so let's double the size.
Right.
And eventually, you get to a point
where we realize.
Right, and you fade off into the sunset. And I think the AI and parts of the internet, the marketing that are happening today, are again going to move some of us into a far better category or more productive state, and maybe send some others off to, the cruise ship.
So to speak. We got a couple minutes. I want to ask you about, and we'll end on this, a funny story. Do you have a funny story, something that happened to you, or something with a listing, or some occurrence in between that still makes you chuckle today?
Wow. I've got some scary stories.
Okay. If you want to end on a scary note,
I don't know if I want to talk about some of those. Not that I can think of off the top of my head, to be honest with you. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's been lots. I mean, there's so many stories that I can't even think of them all.
We'll save that one for the next podcast.
Good and bad, but nothing in particular that I can think of that I would say is funny.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll leave it at that. I appreciate the insights, the going back in time and sharing your story, and continued success.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. That is Michael St. Michael St. Realty. And thanks for checking out the Newsmakers podcast. A big thanks to the All-Star cast behind the scenes. If you like today's episode, click the thumbs up, hit subscribe. You can leave a comment as well. Catch the Newsmakers podcast on chch.com/podcasts and wherever you get your favorite podcasts.